All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the House Appropriations General Appropriations Subcommittee. We're going to call it to order now. Appreciate everybody coming. And first on the agenda today is the Secretary of State's office. Madam Secretary of State. As far as I know, that mic is on over there. It is, okay.
Sure, I can manage. Good morning. I'll refer you to page 19, section 41 of your tracking document. I'm not going to go through everything line by line unless, and I'll defer for some questions, but let me highlight a couple of things. You'll recall that through some various rate negotiations through the Commission for New Georgia, that savings were identified for various agencies. For the Secretary of State's office, it was $97,000. The recommendation in our budget, and also coming from the governor, was for our agency to retain approximately $61,000 of that for the following: to do $21,000 for maintenance and enhancements of computer systems in our corporations division, $25,000 for similar initiative in the securities division, and $15,000 to replace computers in the elections division. In archives, that's one area that I would like to have a restoration of $28,696, and the reason for that is we had asked for the full annual escalation for our commercial rent, and that's at $41,700. However, the governor recommended $13,000, and the reason for that, colleagues, is because there was a sense that we should be able to raise fees from our records retention center. However, the archives building is separate from the records retention center, and I frankly, I don't have a problem with making our records retention center revenue neutral, and so that we have an even up budget, but I don't think it's fair to charge more for records retention to cover the rent escalator in the archives building, since they are two separate facilities, and the individuals or the agencies paying to store their documents in the records retention center are not really storing them in the archives, and I think that that's kind of mixing apples and oranges. Again, it would be a restoration of approximately $28,696. Do you have a question?
Representative Hill has a question.
Sure.
Yes.
If it's appropriate, I hate to interrupt, but I'm
no
a little
worries.
confused. On the fees for the Record Retention Center, do you keep those in-house, or do they go into the general budget? How do those particular fees?
They go, Mickey, do they go into the general fund and then get allocated
many fees
back?
go into general fund, and
Yeah.
some don't, and this sounds like they would have stayed in-house if you could have possibly used them to offset. That's my confusion.
Okay. The Records Retention Center is a user-funded facility.
Okay, thank you very much.
But again, remember, that's separate from the archives, which was my angst about raising fees for something that really wasn't what the fees were going for.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
In elections, there was a recommendation to reduce a one-time cost of $50,000. I wholeheartedly support that. That was a one-time allocation associated with SB 500, which was the pilot project for voter verifiable paper audit trail. Also, the governor's recommended the $100,000 that I requested to fund an independent audit for elections procedures. And I'll answer some questions on that if anyone has them. But very briefly, that is to do an independent audit, given all of the swirling commentary around paper trails, so that we can make sure that we're dealing with data and facts when it comes time to be having a conversation about whether or not we should upgrade our machines. And frankly, I don't feel like we have enough information to come to you as the budgeting allocating body to make any kind of a recommendation to you or to ask you to enter that debate. So this will give us some outside verification on that. It'll also look at our security procedures to make sure that we're doing everything that we can be doing from an internal security procedural and processes standpoint. In professional licensing boards, additionally, we've asked for $100,000, and the governor has supported that, to do an independent audit management review of that entire division. The purpose of that, several of you have already had conversations with me about the customer service elements in that division and how we're organized, and that's what that audit will do, a full management review to let us have some outside corporate sort of overlay and how we're organized from investigative component to the customer service area. And there's also the $90,000, which is a non-recurring cost for the purchase of 5 motor vehicles. That was in FY07, which is coming out. Lastly, I want to mention 2 pieces of legislation that could affect our agency's budget going forward should they pass. The first is Senate Bill 57, which would require the regulation and licensing of dialysis technicians. Were that to proceed through and be signed into law, it would initiate 15,000 new licenses. We would need about $120,000 a year to staff that and to make that work. The fee that's proposed in the bill is $25. That would generate $375,000 worth of fees. And Representative Hill, that does go straight into the general fund. So the fees would more than offset the $120,000 we would need to actually regulate and to implement that program. The second bill is House Bill 330, which would set up a registry for pharmacy technicians. That would increase the number of registrants from 13,000 to over 40,000. We are right now putting together the costs associated with that, and once I have a number, I will communicate that back to you. That concludes my report. I do have individuals from our attached agencies if you have questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? I appreciate the presentation, Madam Secretary of State. I was, if you will, I was looking at these savings that were identified by the Commission for New Georgia.
So the GTA rate renegotiations?
No, the savings that were identified by the Commission for New Georgia. What was it, $97,000?
The 97, yes.
Yeah. What is this? And I know you've gone over this, but. What is L2K? I know what remember Y2K. What is L2K?
That is the internal acronym that the Corporations Division has used for upgrades that we've done for our online processing of corporation filings. And I will tell you that in my first 3 weeks in office, it was rather a nightmare for an upgrade that was put into place in December, and that is very, very much needed to make sure that we can stabilize the system and not have a repeat of what candidly made my first days in office rather uncomfortable.
Okay. Representative Williams has a question. I'm going to ask this Representative Williams before I forget about it. If you'll pardon me.
Sure, I'm going to defer to you.
Well, that's all right. I would normally go to you, but before I forget, on the archives, you were asking for additional funds. What was the additional?
$28,696. And that would make us whole on the rent escalation for the archives building, which does occur every year for, how long is that lease? A 49-year lease.
Now, is that additional or is that a total?
That's the additional amount.
Additional
Yes.
in addition to the $13,000.
Correct.
Okay. Representative Williams, did you have
Secretary, I noticed on the Real Estate Commission you've asked for additional funding for 2 investigators. I don't have any question about that.
Okay.
Do you feel like you've got adequate investigators for the professional licensing boards? I understand they may be short.
Yeah. That's going to be part of what we're looking at with this outside audit. What my sense is, sir, is that we will likely reorganize all of the investigative components of our agency. We only have 2 investigators in elections. We have quite a number in securities. At any given time, an investigator is coming off of a case, and if we can put them in one division under Sean LaGrua, who is the Inspector General, I think that we can probably get the coverage that we need without asking for more. If indeed we need more, that is something that I will be very open to asking for, but I would like to realign first before asking for more.
Thank you. Representative Hill, you have a question?
Yes. But on the 2 independent audits, both under elections and professional licensing, is there any way you could use the audits and accounting department for that, or the fees would be outside? Would that possibly reduce the cost, or are they capable of doing those audits? within their scope? I know they can't.
Yeah, I think elections would be extraordinarily difficult, perhaps for licensing, and that's something that I'll consider. Candidly, I've already asked them to do an audit of corporations, and I'm mindful of absorbing their entire department's resources. I think that there are a number of areas we need to look at, and what we were trying to do was balance using the internal resources of the state with what we could do from an outside standpoint as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Black.
Good morning.
A couple of weeks ago, I asked you for an update on the contractor's licensing thing, and I would just like to get you the opportunity to add any more update that you might have on that. And at the same time, while I'm asking questions, encourage you to keep us abreast with that, because in my judgment, when this thing gets into full swing, this is going to be something that we're going to be hearing a lot about.
Yes, sir. I appreciate the opportunity because I do have an additional update. What the question is about is the licensing board, the new licensing board for commercial and residential contractors. There is a piece of legislation coming through that is a cleanup bill to deal with some of the inconsistencies with what was in the bill and some definitions and some overlap with some of the other boards. That is a very important piece of legislation. We're working very closely with all of the affected industry groups on it so that we can make sure that this is the last cleanup that we hopefully have to do on it. Secondly, I am very mindful of the volume of licenses that are going to come in. We currently have approximately 6,000 licenses that are pending in the offices. What we have done over the past, since our last meeting, is I have instructed the executive director for that board that he needs to do the following, and we've brought in temporary contractors within our current budget to do this. We want to process all of the grandfather applications and have them completed, regardless of what. There's some talk about changing the date of when the license will be required, moving it from January 07 to July. Regardless, the grandfathering component will likely not change, and so we will get all of those licenses processed by mid-year so that those can be out the door, and we can then concentrate our resources on those that who have to come in and take a test and get licensed. Because the last thing I wanted to do was come into September and have upwards of 30,000 licenses that all had to be processed at one time. When all is said and done, it'll be approximately 15,000 grandfather licenses that come through. If we can get that first cut done, that lets us have the back end of the year to deal with the other half from a testing standpoint.
How about the tests? Where are we on that?
The things are moving along there. Apparently there was some sort of a snag with DOAS and some changing personnel around getting the contract out, but they have been terrific, and that has been resolved. The contract is out. We're working on the test, and we should be ready to go in the timeline for that to ensure that people come in, get tested, and get licensed. Whether the date's January 1 or July 1, we'll be ready.
Thank you.
Welcome. And on that, if you have constituents who come through your office with questions on that, please don't hesitate to just refer those over to us. And we're doing a lot of just direct sort of casework, if you will, with a lot of the contractors. It's a complicated license, and we've got people there who know how to help them maneuver through the process. So don't hesitate to call us on that. Kyle is, and honestly, I can't remember Kyle's last name. I'm trying to learn all 450, but I am spending every other week a day in Macon because there's just a lot going on there. But you can just refer it straight over to my office. If you just have someone bring it to the Capitol office, we'll take care of getting it where it needs to be from there, because that's our job.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Another question, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
I know that you weren't, you weren't in office during the process of making a request to the governor's office for the 08 budget. But I'm trying to, maybe you can help me with this. On the savings that were identified by the Commission for New Georgia, and I know the governor's philosophy is that on savings like that sometimes it could be used, part of the savings at least can be used as an incentive for the departments, agencies to do things to do a better job. You know, but I'm just wondering, since during the I know we had hearings back in September with the various agencies on their request for the '08 budget. I don't remember any of these. I don't recall any of these things being identified as having been requested. The 15,000, the 25,000, 20,981. So I'm just curious if you know, and I hear again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious if the previous Secretary of State didn't identify those things. I remember her specifically saying that she had put in a flat budget except for the white paper on the voting machines. I'm just wondering, how were they identified as needs to use part of that $97,000 for? Do you know?
They were in that the original discussion, so maybe there was some confusion around that. But for everything that I've seen, those numbers were in the original. That's a way for us to take the savings and realign into, candidly, what are expensive upgrades, and particularly in corporations and securities and elections, we have to keep our computer equipment upgraded, and this lets us do it on a rolling basis and not have to turn over the entire department's computer system in one fell swoop. But those dollars, just confirm that for me, they were there in the original. The only new things added were the two things that I added, which were the 2 independent audits. Those are the new requests.
Okay. I mean, I'm not disputing anybody's word.
Sure.
I just don't recall that. I don't recall. Any other committee members recall that? And I'm just trying to, I mean, believe me, I'm not disputing anybody's word whatsoever.
No, that's fine. We'll pull the background for you.
I just recall, I remember when different agencies came, that it was kind of a different approach, that they basically all said that they had been asked to submit a flat budget, and there was hardly anything that they were requesting, new. And
it may be, sir, that
I apologize.
I'm sorry.
I apologize. I'm thinking we're on the '08 budget. I'm thinking of the '07 amended budget.
Okay.
And I stand corrected. Yes.
But it may still well be flat, because remember, there are some one-time allocations that we're taking out, 50,000 and a couple of others, so that could be some of it as well.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
I know we have some attached agencies to the Secretary of State's office that are here, and I know the Ethics Commission is here, so there may be others, but do you have a presentation? Is that correct?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go right ahead.
We'd first like to ask not to be cut by $650,000 that the governor recommended. We also are providing an offline request of some additional items that we would appreciate your consideration on. Excuse me. I'd like to go through these just briefly on the offline request that we just handed out. The first item is for a position for a scanner. When the State Ethics Commission took over the responsibilities of the campaign finance disclosure filings, we implemented a scanning system, and we're going back and we're scanning all the papers, because currently we still have individuals who file paper. Although a majority of people file electronically, we need to get those paper forms out on the internet. So the first $34,000 is for a scanning position. The second and third item is we put in our offline request from the General Assembly's request last year. Last year, when the State Ethics Commission took over the responsibilities, we did not send out paper forms for campaign contribution disclosures or personal financial disclosures that each public officer must complete in the city and county as well as the state. We did not have the funding at that time. We do, however, provide it on our internet where individuals can download it. But in the past, the Secretary of State's office actually sent out paper forms. We do not believe that's necessary to do, But if the General Assembly believes that's necessary to do, we have those two figures, the second and the third, and we have a breakdown within this packet of how we came to these figures. But again, we do put it online. It did not seem to be a problem during the election for individuals to receive those papers, to download them. The fourth is for $2,000. Request is for $2,000 for training for our investigators. We have several post-certified investigators that have to do annual trainings that we did not have before. We have increased travel with our new positions, so we're asking for an additional $17,000. We instituted a toll-free number that increased our telecommunication cost around $3,500. Our second to last request is for additional rent space that we're anticipating. We've been told by GBA that we will be moving possibly to the 14th floor on the West Tower. We occupy two different spaces right now. We occupy the balcony level or a suite on the balcony level in the East Tower, and then also the old Capitol Police Building. So that would be additional rent for the space we're told that we may be occupying. And the last request is for $70,000 for a contract with OSA. One of the provisions of House Bill 48 was to put statute of limitations on our cases. And our commission, meeting every 6 weeks to 2 months, was unable to handle all the cases, the administrative procedure hearings. So we're contracting with OSA to expedite the backlog of cases to hear those cases. If you have any questions, Mr. Chairman? No, sir.
I don't see any questions, but I got a feeling that there may be. If you would just, on the tracking document, if you would just give a little further explanation, the first thing you asked for was not to be reduced to $650,000. That's in the governor's recommendation. If you would explain that a little further, so we'd have an understanding, so the committee would have an understanding why maybe it shouldn't be cut or should be cut less or whatever.
Well, it was my understanding that it was recommended that we be cut $650,000 because it was perceived to be a one-time funding. In actuality, the one-time funding came in the supplemental 06 of $500,000. The $650,000 was for the 07 budget for the enforcement of House Bill 48. So I just think there was some confusion there. If we were to be reduced by $650,000, we would have to lose 8 positions. So we would go back to basically our original budget before House Bill 48 was passed 2 years ago.
Back to that first additional request, $34,000 for the scanner.
Yes, sir.
What positions now are not required to file electronically?
If you're under a certain threshold, if you're under $10,000 for General Assembly, you do not have to file electronically. City counties do not have to file electronically until they go over $10,000. They file paper with their local filing officers.
Are you recording the city county stuff?
No, we do not. We just did General
City
Assembly.
County wasn't, but the only people that's required to file with you is legislators that have less than $10,000.
They're required to file by paper. The
Right.
rest are required to file electronically with us, General Assembly. Yes, sir.
That answers the question.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm sorry I was late for your presentation, but did you go into details about how you're negotiating your office space with our what's our office building authority?
With GBA?
GBA.
Yes, we initially had a difference of opinion on amount of moving cost. Yesterday, they came forward and they had a reduced estimate on our moving cost after we explained and we met with them. So we're comfortable with their cost. We're asking for this in 07 supplemental. The cost would be around $200,000 with all the contingency fees, which was dropped by $100,000. So we're comfortable with that.
So you were able to successfully negotiate your rates?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions I see. I want to try to clarify on the $650,000 because I know I've had some conversation with OPB about this and the process that it went through, and I appreciate the explanation you just gave. And now you had said that there was $500,000 that I think we put in the, what was it, the 06 amended budget, was that it?
Yes, sir.
Which was a one-time that we put in for something, I forget what it was.
Computer costs.
Computer costs. Well, now is the governor's office, are they looking at it, even though, I mean, I know that the numbers don't match up, but it's kind of hard to say which, we're $500,000, if that's the same as over. I mean, isn't that what they're looking at, though, that was a one-time that they needed to reflect not being in this budget?
I've met several times with the governor's office to explain where we were and provide them documentation, and they seem to understand where we were coming from.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.
And I might, to the committee members, this is something that as we move on this 08 budget, you might want, if you need to have some conversations with this gentleman. I mean, it's something we need to look at really carefully. But I want to make sure that everybody has the information. I want you to feel like you have the information that you need to address these, if we're going to address them. So, if you have any questions now, he stepped down, but if you have any questions, or if you have any questions later, let's try to make sure that we get those answered, because we we may be moving on with this 08 budget before too long. Everything's been kind of a holding pattern, but when we, how it is, when we start to move on these budgets, they start moving pretty quickly. So, okay. Do you mind?
If I might have one more question, and mine is a clarification, because I don't have a copy of HB 48. But does it require the printing of all those forms, or is that optional only when needed?
It requires that the filing officer make available the reports. In the past, the Secretary of State's office chose to print it because of electronic means and different things. We just chose to provide it electronically. We believe we're in compliance with the law and the spirit of the law by providing those forms, making them available on our website.
That's why I was wondering on items 2 and 3, which are both printing and mailing of those forms, if there's any way that those costs could be reduced by electronic means.
Well,
and if so, I guess my overriding question, is there any modification of 48 that might be required that would loosen up some of these requirements, which would still achieve your goals, but remove some of the mandates that may not be necessary? So I guess I'm asking for your opinion on there. Is there anything we can do to assist you in doing your job better and easier and less expensive?
If all reports were required to be filed electronically, take out the threshold, and it's my understanding that might be proposed in the next week or so. I mean, we believe currently right now, by making them available on our website, that we do not need those two figures. We provided those figures because last year we had several requests on how much would it cost you to continue mailing these reports out. So we were just providing those. We don't believe it's necessary. However, if the General Assembly believes that's something they want us to do, that's what we feel it would cost us.
Okay, they clarified.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sylvia Wagoda with Holocaust, did you have anything?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming. Real Estate Commission, I don't know if there's anybody here. Did you have anything?
If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Anybody have questions? Real Estate Commission? Any of the licensing boards? Anybody else from any attached agency, the Secretary of State's office, has anything that they want to bring to us? That would conclude the Secretary of State's office and attached agencies to the Secretary of State's office. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you coming today. Next on the agenda is the Department of Veteran Services. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, some of you have been dear friends for many years, and it's good to be back. I thank you all for this opportunity to meet with you again this year to discuss our current fiscal year budget concerns. With me today is Mr. Lynn Glass, the Assistant Commissioner for Administration, who I must admit does most of the work in preparing this budget. Mr. Dan Holtz, the Director of Health, Contracting and Facilities over there, Colonel Holtz, is also, we're building a new cemetery down in Glenville, Georgia now. He's working on that also. And Mr. Charles Esposito, the Director of the Georgia War Veterans Nursing Home in Augusta. I might say that that's the finest nursing home in the world. I say that in spite of the fact that Milledgeville is doing such a great job. We got a great nursing home there, but the reason I say that is the Medical College of Georgia operates it for us by contract, training young doctors how to deal with nursing care patients, and you actually see more doctors in our nursing home there than you see in a hospital. Also, Mr. Jim Reynolds, the past National Commander of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. With the exception of some help that is still needed at the Georgia War Veterans Home in Milledgeville, we're very pleased with the Governor's recommendations. Happy with them for fiscal year 2008. At this time, I'd like for Mr. Lynn Glass to present this in greater detail to you, and we'll all be available to answer any questions that you might have. Veterans business in Georgia is a big business. We assist in bringing over $2 billion a year into the state. And some states have more veterans than we do, but we are very proud of the fact that we bring in a lot more money than they do because we got good people out there on the front lines helping these young veterans and old veterans too, and the young ones that are coming back. And no veterans benefit is automatic. You got to apply for it. In order to apply for it, you got to know about it, and that's our job in Georgia to see that we get all the benefits from the federal government that they are entitled to. And many of them are coming back needing help, I can tell you that. Some of them without eyes, legs, arms, and it's real sad to talk to some of them, but I'm happy with the fact that we are getting them what they deserve, because that's part of the cost of war, and we want to make sure our veterans are taken care of in Georgia, and they are being taken care of and will be taken care of. Lynn?
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, our department's budget recommendations for fiscal year 2008 are found in Section 47 of your tracking sheet. And as Mr. Wheeler mentioned just a few moments ago, I'd like to begin by talking to you about the one item that is actually not contained on the tracking sheet that's in front of you this year. When our fiscal year 2008 budget request was first presented to the Office of Planning and Budget back in September and then again in November, it was noted that the same inflationary economic conditions that were influencing the rising cost of operation at our Augusta nursing home, Veterans Nursing Home, was affecting the Milledgeville nursing home as well. With this, we requested an additional $143,000 for the Georgia War Veterans Home in Milledgeville in order to sustain the current level of census and services that are available there today into next year. Again, while it did not appear in the Governor's recommendations, it remains a very real requirement. And as such, we would very much appreciate your consideration in putting the $143,000 in for the Milledgeville Nursing Home, and in doing so, filling this very important gap in our fiscal 08 request. Beyond that, we are, as Mr. Wheeler said, very pleased with the Governor's recommendations in support of our programs, from the statewide common budget changes in personal services, GBA rental rates and adjustments, annualization of the Georgia Veterans Memorial Cemetery costs in Glenville, certainly the enhancement to the Georgia War Veterans Nursing Home in Augusta, And again, worth mentioning a $1.6 million capital outlay projects in the capital outlay budget in the governor's bond package, which includes upgrades, building upgrades, and life safety upgrades to both nursing homes in Milledgeville and Augusta. With this, we very much appreciate your support of the governor's recommendations for our department, in addition to the previously mentioned $143,000 enhancement for the Milledgeville home. I thank you for your kind attention today and stand ready to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, I knew somebody would have one. Representative Williams.
On the Milledgeville nursing home, the 143 funds you need, is that we've got out there an $8,800 cut. Is the 143 to cover that, or is that net out 143?
The Representative Williams, the $8,800 cut was in equipment. That was for hospital beds that we wanted to replace that was cut out. The $143,000 is actually operational costs, would go towards the contract that we have with United Veterans Service to actually operate the home. Okay. And it would allow us to, again, sustain the current level of census and the services that we're providing.
Okay, so those are two different pots.
Two different items, yes, sir.
Okay, I don't see any other questions right now. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for everything you do. Okay, next on the agenda is the, I guess, is it Department of Workers' Compensation? Okay.
And good morning to all of you. It's good to see you. Carolyn Hall with the Workers' Comp Board, and we're in Section 48. I know from all the other agencies you've heard about the common changes that deal with the salary increases, health benefits, our workers' comp premium to DOAS. So when you get down to the only real changes, and we're still in a net situation on our current budget, except for those additions. And back in the summer when you had some early hearings, I think we talked about that we had been working with Tommy Hills at the Governor's Office and the Office of Planning and Budget and Gina Abrams with the Georgia Building Authority to obtain additional space in our main Atlanta office where we rent. We're in the old Southern Company building, which is the old Georgia Power building. And we got additional space for our mediation section and also to provide security for the public and for our employees in that section. So that's the $190,000 represents that increase in the amount of space, as well as some additional smaller increases in our field offices. I've just given you a handout that's similar to ones you've seen before. It just gives you where our offices are located, how the workers' compensation system in Georgia is faring, which is very well, and how we are able to keep the cost per worker in Georgia. There's 2 years' worth of data on that. And also, as you know, the Workers' Comp Board is not funded by general revenue, but by our assessment on insurance carriers and self-insured employers. And we have a slide in there for the other states that are funded, whose commissions and boards are funded that way. Our assessment is below 1%, and it's the lowest of all of our sister states. So we're proud of that. We hope that you will go ahead and go along with the governor's recommendation and for the fiscal year 08.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members? Okay, Representative Hill.
With the governor's recommendation, ma'am, does that fill many of the vacancies you have
on
your slide here?
No, it does not. We just operate continuously with those vacancies, and we move them from department to department just through attrition and based on the request that we keep the budget and those things budget neutral. That's what we did in our request, and that's what they approved.
Sounds like you're becoming a checker player here.
A little bit, yeah.
People around.
Yeah.
If you were to fill those positions, do you know approximately how much it would take to fill them all? Looks like about 300,000 annually.
Yeah, this is Tom Risco, our fiscal officer. About 300,000 or 400,000, and the other, I think our lapse factor was increased this year too. Is that right? On the personal services. So we can get that. We can get it done with what we have. Yeah, we'd love to be able to fill, 2 or 3 additional. We've talked. We also have a compliance group, enforcement group that investigates compliance with workers' compensation and insurance. They do bring in fines and penalties. I think there may be a slide on that, but those fines and penalties did not come to us. They go to Treasury. That's separate from our assessment. So
okay, and if I may expand upon that, would it be reasonable then to assume that perhaps for future years, particularly, overall you might want to look at staffing and say, if we really had 2 or 3 of these positions and filled them, then we could go ahead and do it. If we're living without the vacancies now, that means we can live without them,
Right.
I'm presuming. And I'm not trying to,
Right. No,
to
you're
cut
right.
you down, but maybe a more realistic approach might be to reduce many of these, eliminate them from the needs, and say what we really need is these 3 or these 4 or whatever. So we're not looking at this. Would that be reasonable maybe for the 2009, and then we can come back and look at that, and hopefully then we might be able to fund it.
Right,
If
and it
there
might
was a
be,
reasonable
because
need
I think
and
most other
justification.
agencies are kind of in the same situation, that we carry, a number of vacancies from year to year, even though
Thank
they're
you
on
very
the
much,
books.
ma'am. Thank
Okay.
you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Smith has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Morning.
And good morning to my fellow Representative Warren Massey. I see him quietly sitting back there.
That's right, we've got him now. We're happy to have him.
Could you explain further your slide here on statistics for hearing and ADR? I was just curious about
Right,
that.
our biggest, in our programs, one of our programs is dispute resolution. So we have a regulatory side, and then we have, on the, I think there's an organizational chart in there too, and then we have the dispute resolution side. And in the dispute resolution side, we have hearings, we have trials, and that's the main function of the regional offices that are shown in there. Because the hearings are held in the county of the injury or in a contiguous county. We've got offices around the state, up in Dalton, where Representative Williams is, and Columbus. And then we also have an ADR, which is a mediation section. It's been a great addition to the workers' compensation system. We do mediations all around the state at no charge to the parties or their attorneys. I'm proud of it on one hand because I helped start that back in 1994.
1994?
Mm-hmm. And then it's expanded over time. We now have all the mediators, except for one, are based in the Atlanta office. They do travel. We do have a mediator now based in the Savannah office to help cover those territories. Private mediations can cost up to $1,000 each, and we do several thousand a year, so we're really saving the parties to these claims money and getting them to be able to close their claims, which is what they all want to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions from the committee members? I wanted to ask. I'm trying to get a good understanding of new commission Georgia
Right.
savings, what they identify, and there's a line on here which you may have spoken about, and if you did,
I don't think I did, and that's the GTA, Georgia Technology Authority savings that they projected for us.
Right. Tell me.
And which is a real true projection based on their charges to us over the year. So that was $18,000. It doesn't. The numbers don't reflect on here, and they just moved that from into the program to allow us to use that for travel reimbursements. The legislature increased the travel reimbursements for state employees from 28 cents, I think, to 40, whatever it is now. But it gave us no additional funds for that. So this just allows us to move the savings from that we're getting from GTA through the Commission for New Georgia into what we can use for reimbursing for travel without having to ask for additional money in the budget.
Okay. I appreciate you explaining that. Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much for
Okay,
coming
thank you.
today. Okay, now we've actually gotten a little bit ahead. Is there anybody here from the Department of Banking and Finance?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and other members of the committee. It is a pleasure to meet with you again concerning the fiscal year 2008 budget request. Commissioner Braswell, again, had a conflict and was not able to rearrange his schedule. Hopefully this will be the last time that he has a conflict, and in the future he will be meeting with you. I am David Hancock, Budget Director for the department. I have passed out a handout to you which I hope will provide some clarification about what our agency does and the mission that we have before us. Toward the end of this handout, which I will discuss in some detail, we have 3 specific budget requests which I would like to mention as we go to the conclusion of this presentation. I believe the tracking document, if I'm not mistaken, for our agency is on page 10. That may or may not be correct. If you'll turn to page 1 of our handout, just briefly, that shows our department's mission, our vision, and our motto. And our mission is to promote safe, sound, and competitive financial services in regards to banks, credit unions, mortgage licensees, check cashers, check sellers, money transmitters, and a number of other providers in the state of financial services. If you'll turn to page 2, you'll again see that we have, I have provided to you some selected statistical data and workload measures going back from December 01 all the way through December 31, 2006. I would like to also mention, which I do mention usually in this meeting each year, that our agency receives about $22 million in revenue from these entities and from other functions that we serve and charge for. And our budget for fiscal year 2008 is only about $12.4 million. So we contribute back to the Treasury for your use and the governor's allocation funds to do what you deem appropriate in the state of Georgia. Most of our examination manpower is focused on supervising and regulating commercial banks. We have 65 bank examiners, 9 mortgage examiners, for a total of 74 examiners. You'll see that we have on that chart on page 2, for as of the end of the most recent calendar year, 291 banks. We had 21 new banks open in 2006. And then we have 7 or 8 which are now in the pipeline. That puts a great bit of strain and stress on our manpower. But we have done some restructuring and reprioritizing to accomplish that goal. If you also look at the mortgage brokers and lenders, you'll see an up and down trend over the years, and that's somewhat driven by the economic factors, the interest rates, as well as forcing out some of the bad apples in the group, which we find each year. Last time I met before this group, there was a question in regard to check cashers. Now, I think I did supply the chairman with a letter. I don't know if you received that or not, but I did supply you with a letter answering the question, why did check cashers go up so much from 04, 05, and then jumped in 06 to 713? That basically has to do with know your customer requirements from the Bank Secrecy Act. and the effort in not only the state level but the national level to look at money laundering and to fight terrorism around the country. As a matter of information, with that manpower, I told you we had about 74 examiners within our agency. For 2006, we conducted 137 bank exams, 48 credit union examinations, 27 exams on mortgage licensees. That seems rather small if you look at 27 compared to 3,222. But we are doing a risk focus examination now, and recently we are in the process of shutting down operations of 3 problem licensees, that being Challenge, Apex, and Global, through administrative actions and through the court if necessary. Also, not reflected in those numbers, we also have a number of off-site examinations being conducted from time to time. If you'll turn to page 3, you'll see the supervised assets that fall under the jurisdiction of our department to evaluate annually. And again, we do partner with the FDIC and the Federal Reserve Bank, and we share information among the agencies so we can do a better job, more effective, more efficient, and we try not to duplicate work unless it's a troubled institution. The 3 largest banks, which I may have mentioned to this group last time, are SunTrust, which is about a $190 billion institution, which is hard to get your hands around as examiners, but we have about 5 or 6 dedicated examiners year-round to evaluate that institution. Then we have Columbus Bank and Trust, which is about $6 billion, and then United Community Bank, which is about $5 billion. SunTrust actually provides, of that $22 million in revenue I mentioned that our state has, our department has coming in from these entities, they provide about close to $4 million of that $22 million. If for some reason they merged with a national bank, we would still have enough income to more than cover the budget that is provided by this group and by the governor. If you'll turn to page 4, this is one of the first budget requests I want to mention to you. We had one similar to this in the fiscal year 2007 budget. This involved the Commission for New Georgia and the cost savings identified. You'll see in that first row or column.
May I interrupt just for a second? I apologize, but if you don't mind, when you identify a request on your handout, if you could also identify it on the tracking sheet.
Okay. If you look on the second column, it mentions utilizing that cost savings benefit to $34,544 to purchase 2 vehicles. If you'll go down to, let me see where that is.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm going to interrupt. I don't like to do this, but
that's
we
okay.
have a couple questions. Are these? Y'all have questions that can wait, or okay? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I have no objection. I can stop now and answer any questions.
I would prefer you continue, but if they had questions that pertain to something that you were in right then, it might be better for all of us if you
That's fine. Whatever you want to do.
They say that it's something they'll ask at the end of your presentation.
Okay.
So.
The governor has recommended that we'll be allowed to use part of these savings identified to purchase and replace 2 aging vehicles. We have a number of vehicles. In fact, we have 6 with odometer readings in excess of 130,000 miles. And the governor has been gracious and allowed us to use $34,544 of that to purchase 2 vehicles. The remaining excess of $31,000 plus he has used in other places within his budget proposal and request.
I am going to interrupt right here.
Okay, please do.
This is something that I'm trying to come to grips with, and I think members of the committee are too. How the governor makes his recommendation, I mean, that's up to the governor and his his people and everything. But on this, now when your department made your requests, you had a request for to replace 2 motor vehicles. Is that correct?
In reality, we requested 3 or 4 additional vehicles, and he cut it to 2. Our fleet of vehicles has gone down over the years, and they're aging as well. And sometimes we have to surplus those vehicles because of the condition and the age, and we really need to replenish. But we feel very fortunate that we got at least 2 vehicles.
Okay, it's.
He took the difference between the 66 and the 34 and redirected that to other places within someone else's budget.
I beg your pardon now?
He took the cost savings was $66,172. You seen that first left-hand column on page 4?
Right, and I'm trying to find that number actually on the tracking. I see the line here, but I don't see the number on here.
Yeah, it's a combination of
Well, I'm using an older tracking sheet. I try to do that so I can keep all my notes together. If I keep changing tracking sheets, I end up not having all my notes. So, okay, let me go ahead and I'll look at Janae's here.
Okay, it's on the tracking page 10 of the tracking document, which I see does show in the narrative section realize CNG savings by redistribution of state funds to replace 2 motor vehicles. And it shows 0 out there, but what they have done is actually not replaced or not taking it away from us. They've left it in our budget.
But you'd also said that of some of the funds that were identified by the Commission for New Georgia, implementers, or what they're called, they also they use some of that to replace 2 vehicles, but then you say that they used some of that in another.
Yeah, $31,628 was used in some other. They've took it away out of our budget and put it in another priority of the governor, whether that be another agency or some other initiative.
Okay.
And I believe that happened throughout state government, where savings were identified. OPB gave us the option to try to or to attempt to convince the governor that we needed those funds.
Right.
We attempted to use most of them, but he cut that.
Right.
And I understand in Georgia, we have to be team players, and he shifted those to another source.
Okay, and I can appreciate that. I mean, if I were in your shoes, and I understand to a certain degree what they're trying to do with this, but if the money isn't actually showing, especially that's going to some other, they've identified savings in your agency, and it's not showing in what we, or maybe it is, maybe it's in the governor's, maybe it's in that
Mr.
book.
Chairman, I have another sheet back in my office which more clearly shows this, and I'll be glad to send that to you.
Okay. Representative Smith, I'm going to go ahead and Representative Smith, I think, has a question she'd like to ask right now.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm still tracking with you on your questions, and I think I figured it out. If you'll tell me, in 15.0.10 and 15.0.11, actually, I'm looking at that last one, 11, that 31,628 number is actually the balance when you subtract it from what was
That's
in
correct.
your budget of 66,172, and you subtracted the cost
That's
of your
correct.
2 vehicles, so that 31 that is negative
Is taken out of our
here
budget.
is going to someone else.
That's correct.
And that's what you're telling us.
That's correct. That's what I mentioned, the difference in what was identified plus what the governor's proposing, that 34,544 is that 31,628.
So
he's taking it out.
But as your House Budget Committee, where we struggle, I believe, is that we just want to know where that 66,172 came from.
Okay, I'll be glad to give you that very clearly. I'll give it to you, Ms. Smith, as well as the chairman. I'll send a letter this week or a delivery to your office on that in that regard.
And then my final question, Mr. Chairman. I think you're not the only agency that is using these types of audit procedures with your numbers. In other words, you're showing us where the money went that you didn't spend, but I think other agencies are shifting their savings as well from their technology to other categories. So that's what if I speak for myself. That's what we're trying to figure out.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions. Several more questions.
The governor has provided a detailed listing in his budget report that shows how much he allowed the agencies to have versus what he did not. And I'll be glad to send that to you.
Thank you.
For 07 and 08, it shows the difference.
Thank you. Representative Lenmore James, I think, was next on the question.
Earlier, you mentioned about the three largest banks and talking about how much time you spend in getting your own.
Yes, sir.
And my question is, if a bank exists in Georgia but also in other states, but it merges with a bank here in Georgia and has been operating here for some time, but that bank happened to be much larger than these banks, much larger than what we are anticipating right here in Georgia, how do you treat that bank? For example, RBC Bank is a bank in Canada, but it owns banks here in Georgia. As a matter of fact, they just finished a acquisition here in Georgia. How do you treat that bank as far as size is concerned?
Okay, just to, maybe I can explain this by telling a short story. SunTrust had numerous national banks and state banks in other states throughout the southeast and up and down the coast of the eastern seaboard. And they actually merged all of those national banks and state banks into the Georgia charter. So when they did that, all the entities in other states became branches of Georgia. And so that put a tremendous burden not on our team, but we said we can't do this alone. So we partnered with both the FRB and FDIC to examine those other entities if there was some risk involved. For instance, they may have an accounts receivable, large accounts receivable division in or near Washington, D.C., or in another state up and down the eastern seaboard. And we occasionally send one or two examiners with the Fed for maybe 2 to 3 weeks to evaluate that operation. So when they merge with and into a Georgia institution, that becomes our responsibility for oversight. Does that clarify?
That clarifies, but leave one little thing missing there. Now, RBC is based in Canada.
Okay.
If something is happening where they are shifting some things, how can we get into the Canadian part that to examine them, or that's beyond us?
Okay, in regard to that particular scenario, we have never gone out of the country to do any examination. We've always stayed within the borders of the U.S. And we would probably, if and when that ever occurs, we would utilize the Federal Reserve System to assist us because they have a wider perspective in regard to their examination scope.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Williams has a question.
Going back to the tracking sheet, we're trying, I know this one Georgia, the new Georgia, we're trying to realize the savings and identify what these savings are, and we're still trying to get our arms around exactly what's going on. Would it not be better, were it not for your handout, we would not have known the savings that you realized in your department. It looks to me like in place of the zero, you would have put your $34,000 in there for the vehicles, and then come down under the savings of the 66,172. Then we could identify what that zero represented, because looking at it, we don't know what you did with it.
Yes, sir, I fully understand that, but our agency is not responsible for the tracking sheet. But I do have something which I think can very much clarify is that the governor in his budget report shows every agency and all the savings and what he allowed them to maintain in their agency and the difference. And I'll be glad to probably hand deliver it to Mr. Parsons and Ms. Smith, and then they can distribute it to y'all for both 07 and both 08.
Thank you. Representative Black has a question.
Go
Representative Smith just beat me to that question.
Okay.
I think we're all interested in that.
Okay. I'll try to make that clear for you when I just deliver something down here before the end of the week. I'll have to be back down here for a meeting. I may just come by your office and leave it in a folder.
Okay. All right.
So it doesn't get misfiled.
Okay, that's all the questions I see. That's all the questions I see right now. I apologize. I mean, when people have questions, I definitely want them to get answered, but normally I wouldn't interrupt during the middle
No
of the
problem.
presentation.
I fully understand. Please interrupt whenever you need to. On page 5 of the handout, that's the next. This is a request to amend department program structure. And we have been told by the governor's office that both the House and the Senate must approve any program changes. And what we did, we only slightly tweaked or changed our programming. I tried to make it clear on this page-and-a-half handout what we have done. When the governor appointed Rob Braswell to be commissioner, actually he became commissioner in December 2005, although his appointment was November 2005, the commissioner made several organizational changes to ensure the department was maximizing resources while remaining as effective and efficient as possible. That's that top paragraph on page 5. And what happened, you see 4 bullet points in the middle of page 5. First of all, as of today, the department has 5 programs. The request is to collapse one of those, merging that one into 3 others existing programs. So we'll have 4. What happened in that second bullet point, it says we collapsed the chartering, licensing, and applications program into the 3 programs listed there. The Financial Institution Program, the Non-Depository Financial Institution Supervision Program, and the Administration Program. And after all this is done, also, one of the bullets says we would rename the Mortgage Supervision Program to the Non-Depository Financial Institution Supervision Program. So it's not as complex. If you read the tracking sheet, to be honest with you, I would be confused.
Okay.
But I do believe that this sheet, if you see the programs at the bottom and look at the 4 bullet points at the top, you'll see the 4 programs we desire having, which really are identical to the ones we had previously, except for one rename and the merging of one into 3 others to make it more efficient and effective within our agency. We're not adding any new programs. We're not deleting any functions. We're just, to be more effective and efficient, we have collapsed one program, is what we have done. And on the page 5A, you'll see the positive outcomes of the program changes. And the first one, you can read all 4, but I know time may be running short. One of the big efforts by our new commissioner was to improve customer service, because some of our surveys showed that we were lacking in customer service. So he wanted to sort of take off on the governor's initiative and some of his appointees by saying we wanted to become faster, friendlier, and easier. And so what we have done is we have improved customer service, and the entities we deal with now deal with the personnel in one division. They don't have to skip over 2 or 3 divisions to get one thing accomplished. Now they can go to one division, talk to 1 or 2 people, instead of going to 3 divisions and talking to 5 people. It just makes professional common sense. And so that's what we have done. It also improved internal communication when we did that as well. And now I have 2 other bullet points about that. So we would very much appreciate your agreement or concurrence or approval to see or to indicate a positive or favorable review of this change. We consider it to be very minor. And then the last request is one we consider extremely important. The governor had the state was commissioned. The state did commission the Georgia Merit System Compensation and Benefits Study, along with Mercer consultants, to conduct a salary survey for jobs in Georgia, state jobs. And 3 critical job classifications were identified within our department as being less than market. And those are identified in bold in the middle. They're the examiner classes. Assistant Financial Examiner, that's the trainee, the Financial Examiner 1, and then the Financial Examiner 2, which is known as the Senior Financial Examiner. Just for your information, the first level, the Assistant Financial Examiner, it starts out at a salary of $31,620, which is about 16% below market, as well as about 14 to 16% below what OPB and the Department of Audits pays their beginning analysts and examiners. The Financial Examiner 1 is about 28% below market, and the Financial Examiner 2 is about 37% below market. Those are significant. In one 30-month period, we lost 26 professionally trained examiners. That was devastating to us. And the governor has recognized that and has awarded, or in the tracking document, in regard to salaries, has included $188,539 to be used to upgrade those 3 positions so they will become more competitive. And then he's also, recommending a 3% across the board for those who exceed or meet expectations. As I mentioned, turnover over the past 5 years has been severely impacted the department. We spend in the first 3 years of an examiner's time on the job anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 in training expense. When we lose examiners like this, it's like throwing money out the door. Many of our examiners go to the Federal Reserve System, the FDIC, or to private industry, to other banks and other credit unions, sometimes for 15% increases, other times for 50% increases in salary. I know we'll never be able to completely compete with that market, but we can do a better job than we're doing now. And with that said, I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your presentation. I don't see any of the lights on, and maybe before I ask my questions here, but a couple of questions. And again, thank you for your presentation. On this savings that was identified by the Commission for New Georgia. Now, in the tracking document here, and you said you would have some more information.
I will.
Where do you have any idea where those savings, how those savings were realized?
Yes, sir. In fact, we did, our agency, first of all, when they began this effort, they notified my office, they notified me, the State Properties Commission, along with the commission, and said we need to reduce your rental expense on your Atlanta property.
Okay.
So I have developed over the last 5 to 10 years a good rapport with our Colonial Properties, who we lease from.
Okay.
And I did some job owning and behind-the-scenes work before the state got involved. And we reduced the lease expense from $19 to $20 per square foot down to $15.75 and $16 per square foot. So there was a tremendous savings there. And the majority of that $66,000 is savings in lease cost of premises.
Those were savings that were identified by something that this Commission for New Georgia implementation team identified, but they're not really savings that were caused by any of the initiatives that we funded for Commission for New Georgia. Then are they? I mean, these are savings that were identified, but they're not really related to, it would seem to me, Commission for New Georgia programs that we funded over the last couple of years.
That may or may not be true.
I mean, it seemed like in a way it's true. I mean, in a way what it says is true, but it's not the whole truth.
There's 2 pages of narrative in the budget report, as well as these amounts that each agency saves. and I'll be glad. I will hand deliver or have delivered to your office and other offices, so you'll see.
Okay. The other question I have is not related to New Georgia, but Commissioner for New Georgia. But I had read, I think, last week in some newspaper that Nations Bank has begun a program to offer checking accounts to undocumented persons.
There's been quite a discussion on the airway, on talk shows.
Would that relate to anything in your department? I mean, would it only relate to if it caused the money to not be as secure for other persons that have money in that bank, or how is there any relationship between that? Is there anything that you all would be able to affect that in any way?
Well, Nations Bank is a nationally chartered bank, whereas not a state chartered. SunTrust is our largest state chartered bank.
Okay.
I'm aware that they are requiring the same information from illegals as they are from the U.S. citizens. There was in fact, I heard yesterday about 30 minutes of blasting of Bank of America because of their procedures for the illegals, quote unquote, compared to the U.S. citizens.
Okay.
But I'm not aware that SunTrust and any of the other larger institutions that we have are doing such. That's a good. I wondered about. I have not heard any criticism from our consumer division within our office, but I will find that out today, and I will have a note to you along with that other information I will provide you, whether SunTrust and some of the others are doing that same practice.
Okay, I didn't. I don't listen. I mean, I assume you're probably talking about some Neil Bortz and talk radio, which I never listened to, and I started to say I got my information from
I think Clark
higher
Howard
source, but
was
mine was from a newspaper, so I don't know that that's any higher than Neil Bortz or any of those others.
I think it's been an issue for a number of weeks now, if not months.
Any other questions? Yes, we do have. Representative Hill.
Excuse me, I had to go chair another meeting for a little bit, so I'm returning, and you may have gone over this, but in another meeting I chaired yesterday, there was some discussion of should the payday lending return, and I'm not saying it is, it was hypothesized that it might want to come under the Department of Banking and Finance. If so, do you know if anybody has looked at how much that might cost to administer and regulate? Have yourself or the commissioner come up with a...
Yes, sir. The commissioner and I met about 10 days ago. We came up with a one-sheet description of the estimated cost. I believe, if my memory is correct, that we expect anywhere between 300 and 500 payday lenders to be identified, if I'm not mistaken. And the commissioner did bring down last week, I believe, the handout which I produced. And, of course, it's just an estimate because we do not know what's out there fully. The cost was somewhere, if my memory is correct, between $350,000 and $400,000 to do it right, and that include regular operating expense, examiners, some staffing, real estate rentals. If you would like that estimate, I'll be glad to include that to the chairman, and he can take a look at it.
I think, Mr. Chairman, you might want that just to have that information in case.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'd like a copy of that.
Turn my mic on. I will get copies for everybody.
Okay. I'll have that to you within the next 2 days, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you so much. I want to make sure before you step down, you have no request beyond what the governor's recommended. Is that right?
No, sir. We did have a larger request in regards to increasing the salary of our examination staff, those 3 levels. I do understand money is tight, and this is one step, I think, in a step of hopefully over the next 3 to 4 years to upgrade those levels. So we are very appreciative of what the governor has done.
Okay.
OPB has been a pleasure to work with.
I do have a question. Representative James has a question.
On the payday lending issue, if it is approved, and you've mentioned what it will cost to oversee this particular program, what will be the net cost effect to the state of Georgia?
We did take a look at that too, and again, this is an estimate. It does appear that the revenue which would be generated would cover the cost of licensing and oversight of that industry. Until you get in, I think within the first 2 years you'll know whether you've hit target, and we may have to tweak that and request some more funds. But the commissioner and I did discuss that, and it does appear that the proposed revenue and the charges to be assessed would cover that $350,000 to $400,000 cost of the program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you, and I'll have that information to you within 2 days.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Department of Administrative Services.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Brad Douglas. I'm Commissioner of DOAS. Let me put this here because it's a fall.
Tell us your name again, I'm sorry.
Brad Douglas.
Thank you.
And if I could draw your attention to the section of the tracking sheet, it's section 13, page 9 of 25. And I believe this will be a fairly straightforward order here. We've got the first number I'd like to speak about, if I may, is under administration, where we are actually moving costs from one area of our agency to another. And that's where we're picking up a communications division that had been housed in the administration unit and moving it down to purchasing to help us communicate better about some of the purchasing initiatives that are in place. And so that's just a strict dollar-for-dollar move within the agency. The next number is listed under fleet management as a savings there of approximately $115,114,677, and that's stemming from a reduction in the rental pool fleet here on Capitol Hill, to where we have lowered the number of vehicles available for rental. And as a result of that, we've increased the utilization of that fleet on a daily basis. The utilization has increased over time. We've raised it from the in the mid 60% utilization rate up to 86% now as a result of those reductions. The next figure, the $243,940, is once again some additional changes associated with that, dealing with maintenance and those vehicles, whereas the 114 is actually the purchase price of the vehicles that's coming down since we're buying fewer. If I can skip down, of course, the 247 underneath state purchasing we've already talked about. That's the increase that is the other side of the decrease that I first spoke about. And then the 1.705 million is a transfer of personnel to the state accounting officer as they are managing the asset management program, and so that's part of a technical team. When that project became enterprise-wide versus just focused against our agency, it made sense to transfer that to the unit who was going to be hosting the program for the state in its entirety, and so that's going to be SAO. And lastly, the $1,008,539 is a reduction in the cost that we've identified for some of the purchasing systems. Part of that stems from the fact that we went to market with both the Merit System and the State Accounting Office, and were able to strike an extraordinary deal for the software that we purchased from PeopleSoft. And so that cost actually was much less than what we had anticipated, and so we're returning those funds. Questions?
Do we have any questions? I wanted to ask you, under fleet management, these two decreases, the $114,000 and $243,000, it would seem that those, I mean, wouldn't you agree that those are actually savings or decreases that would have been caused by some of the initiatives of the Commission for New Georgia? I mean, aren't these a result of some of those initiatives that they had?
Not directly in this case, sir. The reason for that is this just deals with the Capitol Hill rental pool. And so when I became commissioner back in May, I started to take a real hard look at the utilization of the vehicles to be quite honest with you, I park near those vehicles. And so I started to question why so many vehicles were in place on a daily basis. And so we still really started looking at the numbers. And although we had cut the vehicles a year earlier, I felt another cut was in order. And so we've reduced the vehicle count from about 143 down to 103. And the utilization of the fleet then has increased once again from the mid 60% range up to 86% now on a regular basis. There are several days when we actually run out of vehicles for rental here on Capitol Hill, and we have to engage Enterprise Rent-A-Car to bring vehicles in as a stopgap measure so that rental vehicles are still available for the customers.
Are the vehicles that are used by our various state police forces, are those purchased through DOAS?
They are purchased off the statewide contract that DOAS, the State Purchasing Division, puts into place, yes, sir.
Okay. When those vehicles are replaced and you sell off the old ones,
yes,
how is that handled? What takes place if you say you have, I don't have any idea what the number, if you have 75 state police vehicles, state trooper vehicles, state patrol vehicles, and you sell them or get rid of them, whatever you do. What is the process for that?
The process is, the current process is that those come through our surplus property division. We have 3 locations, Tucker, Americus, and Swainsboro. And those vehicles are surplus. Typically, they're listed out on one of 3 websites that we list the property for sale. And we typically do not, quote, cascade those vehicles to other state agencies because of the hard use that they endure during their useful life, high-speed pursuits and such. Currently, the state patrol vehicles are some of the hardest run vehicles in the state fleet. And so one of the changes that I'm looking to implement through the new Office of Fleet Management, which has now come back my way, is to make sure that we have different standards, if you will, for different uses of vehicles. One of the key things that you want to do in fleet management is to make sure you have fit for use in place. So the appropriate vehicle for the appropriate use. And not every vehicle can be treated the same way in terms of its useful life or the appropriate mileage when that vehicle needs to be turned in. I think that there are a lot of cases where we could probably do better in surplusing vehicles and getting a higher dollar value back for the state if we turn these vehicles in sooner and thus lower the amount of maintenance and operating costs that we have. Quite honestly, to take a state patrol vehicle and run it to 135,000, 140,000 miles is well past its useful life for the duty that vehicle is placed in business for or in duty for.
What vehicle is the state purchasing for state patrol now? Is there any particular one, or just depends on the RFP and the?
It has been the Ford Crown Vic, and my understanding is that there's a movement to change that to the Dodge Charger.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. And I have a couple of questions here. Somebody, a representative, had mentioned to me yesterday, and I am not a sponsor of this, and I'm not, I don't know anything very much about the bill, but it mentioned to me that they had a bill yesterday that would, and I think I understand where they're coming from and what they're trying to do. Apparently there's a bill that would allow the state troopers, once they were assigned a car, and I suppose as an incentive to take care of the vehicle better, somehow they would get an incentive or something, or maybe I think they even said that state trooper would be the one to sell the car, which I don't understand that, but there'd be some kind of an incentive for them to take better care of it. So
the elements of the bill, as I understand it, Mr. Chairman, are that the vehicles would be turned in at 75,000 miles. DPS would be the one who would be surplusing the vehicles, retaining the funds, and then buying the new vehicles. And we have a presentation tomorrow with Colonel Hitchens to show him our vision and what we're planning for the Office of Fleet Management. And we believe once he sees that, he would be satisfied with our vision and our direction that we're heading. Based on what I just described to you, that I think there are different standards that need to be put in place. I don't think when it comes to fleet management, in fact, it's been proven in other states, one size does not fit all in terms of the useful life or the standards that you measure the vehicle usefulness or the total cost of ownership.
Well, I've had some experience with fleets, not a police fleet, but I worked for many years with Bell South, and we, of course, had a large fleet.
Sure.
And I'm not sure but what those vehicles may be under harder use than the state patrol cars, to tell you the truth. they were pretty well abused.
Typically, the state patrol vehicles are used by a lot of taxi drivers for the hardware that they carry, the rear ends and such. And
Right,
so
right.
Even the ones that have been heavily damaged or totaled in accidents, there's a lot of spare part value to those.
I do have one more
Amazingly
question,
so.
and I apologize, committee man. Normally, I will always defer to them, let them ask questions, but since I'm on this train of thought, and I know this vehicle could have come from any police department across the state or any other state for that matter. But yesterday I was in traffic and behind a former police vehicle, and it still had the, and I think this is actually identification put on by the manufacturer, but it had the police interceptor.
Yes.
Which would seem to me, if it were still on there, that could be misleading. You know, when you have these cases where people are trying to pull somebody over for reasons they shouldn't, identifying themselves as a police officer. Do y'all normally are those taken off? I mean, I know it's a identification by the manufacturer, but still it would be identification that could possibly lead somebody to think it was actually a police vehicle.
That insignia that you're speaking about is a description of the option package that comes for that particular vehicle. That describes the running gear, the engine, the high horsepower engine, and even gets down to the size of the tires on the vehicle. And so that is something that is installed by the manufacturer onto the vehicle. We do remove all other markings on the vehicle that would identify it as a police vehicle, but that one being something installed by the manufacturer, we do not currently.
Okay, thank you. I want to go to Representative Black. Representative Black, I almost always tend to go to the right here, so I don't know who was first, but I'm going to ask you to go first.
Let me go back and talk about these trooper cars, because a number of years ago I went out and spent some time out at the State Properties Warehouse and was told at that time that these trooper cars were the most prized possessions they got a hold to, and actually had a waiting list from local governments that wanted to get a hold of them. Is that not the case anymore?
You find that the vast majority of the people wanting them want them for parts, once again, because this police interceptor package is pretty unique, and so the parts that come on these particular Ford Crown Victorias are not easily had. There are a lot of other different types of fleets that use the same vehicles, the most notable being taxi fleets. And so, but also other police forces across the state have money issues, just as many of us do, and so they struggle to find the funds to replace vehicles that are damaged in their fleet. So a lot of times they're buying them for replacement parts or seeing if there's any salvageable value to it so that they could use it even as a limited service patrol vehicle.
But the pattern still exists that these vehicles are moved down to local governments and is not marketed through their normal distribution system. Is that correct, or has that changed?
No, they are handled the same way. My understanding is they're handled the same way as any other surplus that we have, in terms of what we do with it at our surplus division.
Do you ever have any sitting out there on the lots for people to come and choose, or do you ever have them go to any of the auctions they have?
We do, and so the only thing that we don't do is we don't allow state agencies to take them because of the high abuse and the high mileage and typically the bad shape that they have, because once again it's a total cost of ownership issue in terms of maintenance and operating cost.
Thank you.
Any questions? All right. So you don't, make sure I know before you said that, you don't have any evidence for us beyond what we have.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next we have Georgia Technology Authority. Pretty much on track. Just this and GPA to be finished for the day. That's tomorrow. No, I don't want to miss that.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good
morning,
morning.
members of the committee. We are actually going to pass out a small presentation here. My name is Patrick Moore, by the way. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Technology Authority. The Georgia Technology Authority does not have a direct reference in the tracking sheet. So to help follow our budget, we have a couple of slides in this presentation that we passed out to just be clear. But we are not directly referenced in your tracking document. So if you will, we'll jump right in, and Mr. Chairman, we have prepared some answers to some ongoing questions that this committee has asked in the past. We can spend as much or as little time on those as you want. Obviously, the priority today is the budget, and that's where we'll jump right in. If you'll turn to page 2 of the presentation, you can see our proposed budget for fiscal year 2008. You can see that our base budget is $174.2 million. We are receiving $4.4 million in state general funds, which is a continuation of both the Wireless Communities Georgia funding, which was funded by the legislature last year, and a continuation of funds for Commission on a New Georgia projects. The $396,000, $769,000 there is ongoing funding for project managers for Commission on a New Georgia projects. That funding began in the amended 05 budget. You can see for our proposed changes, the state general funds, the $53,858, that is an OPB calculation, which is related to health care payments and personnel benefit issues. And the reductions are right sizings that we are taking within our own budget, and we have the specific list of what those cuts are on the next slide. So between those, the base budget and the proposed changes, you can see that we're going to have $4.45 million in state general funds in 08, and our budget would actually decrease by around $3.5 million. Our GTA's internal budget would decrease by about $3.5 million. If there are any questions on that page, I'm happy to answer those, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions from the subcommittee? I don't see any. I do want to ask. I want to make sure I understand. You were talking about the continuation, and you mentioned I think you mentioned that. I can't remember the name of it, but the name, where we funded last year for the cities to have the
yes, sir.
Wideband
Wireless Communities Georgia. Yes, sir. It's $4 million. It was in the governor's budget last year, and the legislature funded it. The governor has proposed an additional $4 million to keep that program moving forward, and that's what that money is.
Now, show me where that's at here.
I'm sorry. It's right. If you look under our base budget, you begin over on the left-hand column, FY08 base budget, and you go down to program budget.
Okay.
You'll see state general funds of $4,396,769. The $4 million of that is the Wireless Communities Georgia funding. The remainder, the $396,000, is for project managers for Commission on a New Georgia projects, and that's a continuation from it began in the amended 05 budget.
Okay, so this $4 million. And bear with me, I apologize.
Of course, yes, sir.
But $4 million is okay. This is okay in the 08. Okay, you mentioned the difference between the $4,450,000 and $4,396,000.
Yes, sir.
But now this $4 million, that is an additional $4 million to the okay.
Yes, sir. There was $4 million appropriated last year. The governor has we're looking for another $4 million in 08 to expand the program and build out the concept of wireless communities further across the state.
Okay. Well, I don't want to stop you while you're in the middle of and we have another agency to come.
Of course.
But we do need to have a kind of an update on what's happened with the money that we put into it last year.
Absolutely, and let me see if it's here. We actually do have a brief update on page 11 on where we are with the Wireless Communities Georgia. We are in the process of working with each of the agencies.
Okay.
The funds have been, or I'm sorry, not agencies, with the communities. 6 communities were selected, and those funds are now spoken for. We are in the process of signing MOUs with each community so that we're establishing very clear guidelines on how the funds are going to be spent and what plans we expect back from the communities. And we are, we're going through the process of distributing those funds. We're going to reserve around $300,000, $350,000 as a contingency to prepare for any problems with these projects. They're complicated projects, so we wanted to have a little bit of a reserve in case we needed to rectify some problems going forward. But right now the plan is the funds have been awarded, the communities have been selected. We're now working with each one of them to establish MOUs and make some very clear criteria on how we're actually going to measure the progress of those programs.
Okay. That's all. We might want to hear more about that at another date.
Okay.
So I will. Oh, okay. Representative Hill, thank you for telling me that.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Moore, the $4 million that was used last year for these 6 communities, which is starting the $4 million that we're asking for the continuation. What will those monies be utilized for? Back into the same 6 communities, or we're going to go forward with some other communities to start up?
We would go forward with additional communities. The plan would be we want to expand the scope. We're seeing that there's a lot of benefit in creating some more wireless access and creating network access. So we want to create. The governor wants to create a situation where we're trying to keep this wireless communities growing and bring the benefits of that to other parts of the state. So the idea is to expand.
Okay. Have those communities been identified yet?
No, sir, not yet. We would go through the same process we went through last time. There was a $4 million. We actually asked for approval. We asked for project requests, and the agencies came, or the communities came to us. They said, "Here's our plan, and this is how much money we would like." And they walked us through the business plan. Based on those applications, we selected 6 communities. There were 17 total communities that applied for the grants. The funds are distributed as grants, and that's how we anticipate moving forward with this program this year. If that changes, obviously we'll let the committee know, but that's the intent.
Okay, and some of those will be jointly funded? I mean, maybe the cities will come up with some monies on their own?
Yes, sir. They all did that last time around. That's one of the requirements, is that the communities have skin in the game, and that we hope that creates a better program.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Like I said, we may want to meet formally or informally and just kind of discuss this later. I tell you what, if you can wrap it up, we've got the room for about another 12 minutes, and we do have Georgia Building Authority, who I know have sat here patiently all morning long.
Understood.
And I appreciate your presentation. You're doing a great job. If you just go ahead and wrap it up.
Well, thanks. We'll wrap it up. The only other piece I would turn to is page 3, which is our specific budget proposals, and this comes right out of the governor's budget. These are simply the reductions that we have proposed in our own internal budget. We're trying to right size, find the efficiencies within our own organization, and that's what's on page 3. So other than that, I'm set, Mr. Chairman.
And you're not requesting anything in addition to what the governor's recommended?
No, sir. That is correct.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we do have Georgia Building Authority, which is our last agency to come up. And if you would come up and make your presentation. Thank you for being so patient all morning. We are actually almost on schedule, somehow, miraculously. So, but I would remind everybody we've actually got another group that's set to come in here at 10 o'clock, so we need to finish up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to talk to you about our fiscal year 2008 budget request. My name is Joanne Chance. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Georgia Building Authority and State Properties Commission, and my director, Gina Abrams, sends her apologies for not being able to be here. If you will look at section 36 in the tracking document, or page 17 of 25, you will see that the Georgia Building Authority / Properties Commission had one major issue in the 2008 budget, and that was a rent increase. The rent increase equates to 67 cents per square foot, and it totals $1.7 million. Of that $1.7 million, $756,000 is to replace the funding that was used from our rent collections last year to provide the pay raise and to pay the health insurance increase. So this is a retrospective repayment. The $1 million is for utility increases. The Georgia Building Authority maintains 4.5 million square feet of space, and the utility bills have gone up significantly over the past several years. We experienced a $1.2 million increase from 2005 to 2006. We're projecting about $400,000 over that level again this year. Most of that is water for the City of Atlanta and the new electrical rates. We have provided the Office of Planning and Budget with the spread of that $1.7 million by state agency so that they could go in and appropriate or recommend appropriations for the increased rent rate in all of the state agencies. If you will look at the handout on page 1, or really it's page 2, sorry. On page 2 it tells you that we have 2.6 million square feet of office space. The 4.5 million is gross square footage. 2.6 million is just office space. That doesn't include storage space. It doesn't include the governor's mansion, the state capitol, or buildings that we do not collect rent for. We have asked for a 29 cents per square foot increase to cover last year's salary increase and the health insurance. And you can see the amounts on that second page there. And that equates to 29 cents a square foot. And then the utilities for the $1 million equates to 38 cents a square foot for a total adjustment of 67 cents a square foot. So we would be collecting a grand total of $35.1 million for our office space only. If you look at the next page, it tells you what the rates are now and what they will be going to. We currently charge $12.30 a square foot for our standard office space, and that's about 80% of our office space. We charge $14.39 a square foot for our premier office space, and really what that means is if it's been recently renovated, like the TW building and the health building that's being renovated now. That is about 20% of our total office space. So when you add the requested increase of 67 cents, then our new FY08 rates would be $12.97 for about 80% of the space and $15.06 for about 20% of the space. I'll move on to the bond section if you... Okay. That is section 49 or page 24 of 25. And we have a governor's recommendation of 3 items. And that would be item 49.2.1.40, 41, and 42. The first one is the Mitchell Street closing, and the governor has recommended just over $5 million for that. The Mitchell Street closing, it would be closed for traffic. The Homeland Security has done a report on Capitol Hill, and one of their main recommendations is to close down Mitchell Street to traffic and turn it into a pedestrian plaza. That would keep traffic from going between the LOB and the Capitol and cut down on some of the security risk. We would install the bollards that block traffic but that can be dropped down into the street so that emergency vehicles could pass through. It would be a pedestrian plaza, and it would be safer for people to cross between the 2 buildings. The next item is the Capitol Hill building facade restorations of $4.9 million. That is 4 buildings: the Judicial, the 244 and 254 Washington Street, and the Coverdale LOB. I don't know if you've noticed, but the facade is literally coming off of the LOB, and we have scaffolding over there holding it up. This money would pay to keep those facades from falling off. They'd be recaulked. They would be, bolted in and reattached, just like we did on the DOT building. And the third and final item is $2 million for the Capitol building renovations, and that's for the plaster repair inside the atrium, so that we can take those nets down and get rid of that. All of these were recommended by the governor, and we have no request over and above that, and we appreciate your support.
Quickly. First of all, is all of the state-owned property being utilized now? It's all rented out?
All of the Georgia Building Authority owned property is being rented out, yes, sir, with the exception of the health building, and it is under renovation. As soon as it's renovated, GTA will be moving out of the Twin Towers and into the health building, and we'll be backfilling that area.
My second question is the park index.
Yes, sir.
Vehicles now have gotten larger, but it looks like the spaces have gotten smaller, and we're catching the devil trying to park and get out there. What can you do about that today?
Well, what we have just done is signed a contract with a parking assessment firm to come in and look at our entire parking operation. Parking is just broken. We don't have enough of it. What we have is the spaces are too small, they're old, they're dilapidated, and we just need some help. So we have just signed a contract with Walter Moore to come in and look at our parking and give us some ideas on what we can do to improve all of those issues.
Thank you, and you can't do it too quick.
Yes, sir. We hear you loud and clear.
Mine will be very quick, and maybe just my memory's failing me, which is quite possible. We discussed the water problem at the governor's mansion. Was that addressed in the 2007 or?
Yes, sir, it was.
It was, okay.
Yes, sir. The governor recommended $3 million, and it is sorely needed. As a matter of fact, we really need about 4.5.
Okay, thank you.
You want to write that down?
That concludes our questions. Thank you very much. Thank you for being so patient.
Yes, sir.
And we wrap up with, I think, 1 minute left, which is pretty good. Thank you very much.